I never thought I'd see the day when something as simple as walking into a store could turn into a nightmare I'd never forget. But that's exactly what happened. One moment, I was a woman just like anyone else. An actress with dreams, with struggles, with bills to pay and people I love to care for. The next, I was a suspect. A thief. Criminal. Not because of what I had done, not because of how I carried myself, but simply because of the color of my skin. Before I dive deeper into this story, let me pause for a second and ask you something. If you're here, listening to me, it means the story resonates with you, or maybe it opens your eyes to something you've never thought about before. Either way, I want you to stay on this journey with me. So, please, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment below. Tell me what this makes you feel because trust me, it's going to get heavier. I want this story not just to be heard, but to echo, to ripple out beyond this video. Now, let's get back to that day. It was bright outside, too bright for what I was about to endure. I remember adjusting my sunglasses as I stepped into the store. I had just finished an audition earlier that morning, one of those where you walk out unsure if you impressed anyone or just wasted your time. My head was buzzing with the usual self-doubt. Was I good enough? Did I stand out? Or did I look like just another face in the crowd? I wanted to distract myself, so I stopped by this boutique, a place that sold nothing out of the ordinary, just clothes and accessories. I wasn't planning to buy anything, really. I only wanted to look around, maybe touch the fabrics, lose myself in the small details of life for a moment. And then I felt it, that stare. You know, the one I'm talking about, the kind that lingers too long, not because someone finds you beautiful or interesting, but because they've already decided something about you without knowing a single thing. First, I tried to brush it off. I told myself maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe she's just doing her job. But the gaze was sharp, cutting, following me with every step. The saleswoman didn't even bother to hide it. Her eyes scanned my hands, my bag, the clothes I touched. She whispered something into her little earpiece, and in that instant, I knew. I wasn't a customer in her eyes. I was a potential threat, a shadow moving between the racks. It's strange how quickly your body reacts when your dignity is on the line. My heart started to race, my palms dampened, but not out of guilt, out of fear, out of anger. Imagine being accused without words. Imagine standing in a place where the air suddenly feels heavier, like you don't belong, like the walls themselves are closing in because someone decided you're dangerous. I walked slowly, trying to act normal, trying to ignore the storm building inside me. But then, another woman, this time a manager, appeared. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed, but underneath it was suspicion. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. The question was innocent enough, but her tone betrayed her. It wasn't curiosity, it was control. She wanted to keep me where she could see me, wanted to remind me that I was already under a microscope. I forced a smile back. "Just looking." My voice came out calm, though my chest felt like it was about to explode. And then it happened. 2 security guards walked in, their steps heavy, their eyes fixed on me. The manager didn't have to say the words. I could read it on their faces. I was the problem. I was the suspect. My heart sank. People around me turned their heads, some pretending not to stare, others openly gawking, as if the scene had been staged for their entertainment. Do you know what it feels like to be stripped of your humanity in public? To have strangers look at you and decide you're guilty before you've even opened your mouth? It's like your entire identity collapses. You stop being a person with dreams, with memories, with family waiting at home. You become nothing more than a stereotype in someone else's story. One of the guards spoke up, his voice firm but cautious. "Ma'am, we've received a report." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I froze. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to demand they treat me with respect. But all I could think about was how quickly things escalate when someone who looks like me raises their voice. How easily "I'm innocent" gets twisted into "she's aggressive." So I stood there, trembling, my mind racing back through every injustice I'd ever felt, every warning my mother had whispered to me growing up. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't give them a reason. Stay calm, even when they don't deserve your calm. I looked at the guard and said quietly, I didn't do anything. He nodded, but not in agreement, more like acknowledgement of my words he didn't believe. And at that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter who I was. Actress, daughter, friend, human being. None of it mattered. To them, in that moment, I was nothing but my skin. I wish I could tell you that the situation ended quickly, that someone realized the mistake and let me walk out with my dignity intact. But that's not how this story goes. The guards asked me to step aside, away from the racks of clothes and the casual shoppers pretending not to listen. They positioned themselves on either side of me like I was already in handcuffs, like I was some kind of danger they had to contain. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to keep them still, visible, calm. Every fiber of my being wanted to cry out, to scream that this was wrong. But I remembered my mother's voice again. Steady, insistent. Don't give them a reason. One of the guards said, We've been informed of suspicious activity. Suspicious. That word echoed in my head like a hammer. Suspicious of what? I hadn't slipped anything into my bag. I hadn't hidden anything in my pockets. I hadn't even unfolded a piece of clothing. I had just looked, browsed, existed. But to them, my very presence was suspicious enough. I wanted to argue, to ask them to check the cameras, to demand proof. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Proof wasn't what they were after. They weren't looking for facts. They were looking for confirmation of a story they'd already written about me before I even walked through those doors. As they questioned me, I could feel the weight of every gaze in that store pressing down on me. A mother clutched her child closer, as if my mere existence could harm him. An older man shook his head, muttering something under his breath. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, and I could see the glow of the camera aimed in my direction. My humiliation wasn't just happening in real time. It was being recorded, possibly uploaded, maybe even laughed at by strangers on the internet later that night. And still, I said nothing but the truth. I didn't take anything. I was just looking. The manager hovered nearby, her arms crossed, her lips pursed. She didn't need to say it out loud. I could feel her satisfaction, her certainty that she'd caught me, that maybe, in her mind, she'd done her duty and protected the store. Protected it from me. Here's the part that cuts deepest. I knew this wasn't about me as an individual. It wasn't about what I wore or how I walked or even what I said. This was about a long, ugly history I was forced to carry the moment I was born. My skin came with a story I never agreed to, a story I had no control over, one that people projected onto me whether I liked it or not. And on that day, in that store, I was living the worst chapter of that story. The questioning dragged on. They asked me to open my bag, to show them its contents. My hands shook as I unzipped it slowly, pulling out nothing but my wallet, a few receipts, and a script from the audition I'd just come from. I placed them on the counter, one by one, as if laying out evidence of my innocence. The guard rummaged through my belongings, his gloved hands brushing aside my things without care, without respect. Every item was a piece of my life, but in his eyes, they were just potential hiding places for something stolen. When he found nothing, he didn't apologize. He didn't even look surprised. He just exchanged a glance with the manager, a silent conversation that told me they still weren't convinced. And that's when the anger really began to burn. Because you can forgive a mistake, you can forgive suspicion if it's resolved with humility. But what do you do when innocence isn't enough? What do you do when your very existence is treated as evidence of guilt? I stood there, my body rigid, my voice low. You've seen everything. There's nothing here. Are you going to let me go? The guard hesitated. The manager's lips twisted. And for a moment, I thought they might still drag me out, might still call the police, might still turn this humiliation into a nightmare with sirens and flashing lights. But instead, the guard finally stepped back. You can go. 2 words. That's all I got. Not an apology, not a recognition of their mistake, not even a shred of remorse. Just a cold dismissal, like I was being allowed to breathe again, but only because they were done suffocating me. I picked up my things slowly, carefully, making sure not to move too fast, not to give them another excuse. And as I walked toward the door, the stares didn't stop. People looked at me the way you look at someone who narrowly escaped punishment, as if I was guilty but lucky enough to slip away. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt different. It wasn't warm anymore. It felt harsh, exposing. The air around me was heavy, and my chest ached with something I couldn't name. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of grief, a mourning for the piece of myself I had lost in that store. Because that's what these moments do. They take something from you. A piece of your confidence, a piece of your freedom, a piece of your belief that maybe the world can be fair. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back the same. As I walked down the street, I replayed everything in my head, over and over. The stairs, the whispers, the guard's heavy steps beside me, the manager's smug silence. And I realized that this wasn't just about one store or one day or one misunderstanding. This was about a pattern, a cycle, a system so deeply rooted that even innocence couldn't break it. That day, I was treated as a criminal just because of my skin. And the most painful part wasn't the humiliation. It was the knowledge that it could happen again. That no matter how hard I worked, no matter how far I went in my career, no matter how many scripts I memorized or roles I played, I could still be reduced to this moment, this stereotype, this suspicion, again and again. And in that realization, something shifted inside me. When I finally made it back home that day, I dropped my bag by the door and sank onto the couch. My hands were still trembling, and it felt like every sound in the room was louder than it should have been. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, even my own breathing. I stared at the ceiling, trying to calm down. But the truth is, I wasn't just shaken by what happened in that store. I was haunted, because it wasn't new. It was just louder this time, more public, more humiliating. But the truth is, I'd been carrying echoes of that same story my whole life. The looks, the whispers, the assumptions, the way people shifted their bags to the other shoulder when I walked by, as if I might snatch it from them. The way security guards always seemed to appear when I entered a store, their presence wrapped in that fake casualness that's anything but casual. That day in the boutique, it all came rushing back. I closed my eyes and I saw myself as a little girl, standing in the kitchen while my mother braided my hair. She leaned close, her hands steady, her voice soft but firm. "Baby, the world will not always be fair to you. You'll have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. And sometimes, people won't even look at your work. They'll only see your skin. But you keep your head high. You remember who you are." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought she was just being overly cautious, maybe even dramatic. I was a kid. I believed in the innocence of the world, in the kindness of strangers, in the idea that people judge you for what you do, not what you look like. But years later, standing under those fluorescent lights in that boutique, I realized she had been preparing me all along, preparing me for that exact moment. And it broke me in ways I didn't even notice at first. Because the worst part of carrying this kind of weight isn't the one moment it happens. It's the accumulation. It's the way one small cut adds to another, and another, until your spirit feels bruised all over. That day was just the sharpest cut, but the scars had been building for years. I thought back to high school, when a teacher accused me of cheating on an exam because my score was too high. I remembered the look in his eyes. Not pride, not surprise, but doubt. As if my intelligence had to be explained away by dishonesty. I remembered being followed around in a store as a teenager, the clerk trailing me down every aisle, pretending to straighten shelves that were already neat. I remembered the sting of laughter from kids on the playground, mocking the way my hair coiled, tugging at it without permission like it was a toy. Each memory was a thread in the same fabric. And as I sat there on my couch that day, I realized the fabric had been wrapped so tightly around me that I sometimes forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. That it wasn't normal, even though I'd been told to accept it as normal. But I didn't want to accept it anymore. I thought about how that moment in the boutique would follow me into every audition, every role, every red carpet. I'd walk into rooms where people saw me as an actress, but somewhere deep in their minds that suspicion might linger. She doesn't really belong here. She's out of place. And yet, as painful as the memory was, something inside me began to fight back. I remembered my mother's words again, but this time, I heard them differently. You remember who you are. Who was I? I was more than the stares, more than the whispers, more than the guards and the suspicion. I was more than the stereotypes cast on me like shadows I never asked for. I was an actress because I believed in the power of stories. Because I believed that when we tell the truth, raw, painful, beautiful truth, it can change the way people see the world. So maybe this was my story to tell. Not just the glamorous parts of my life, not just the roles I played on screen, but the messy, ugly truth of what it feels like to be reduced to your skin. To be criminalized for existing. To be reminded that no matter how far you climb, someone can try to pull you back down with a single look, a single accusation. And I realized that by telling this story, by refusing to bury it, I could take back a piece of what was stolen from me that day. Because silence only feeds the cycle. Silence is the soil where prejudice grows. But stories have power. Stories pull back the curtain. They shatter the illusions. They force people to confront the truth. As the evening light spilled through my window, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let that day in the boutique define me, but I also wouldn't let it disappear. I would carry it, not as a wound to be hidden, but as a torch to light the path. Because here's the truth. I am not suspicious. I am not guilty until proven innocent. I am not a thief or a shadow or a threat. I am human, and if my story can remind even one person of that, if it can peel away even one layer of ignorance, one thread of bias, then maybe that humiliation won't have been in vain. Maybe, in some way, I can turn that moment of pain into something bigger than myself. The days that followed felt strange. Like I was walking through a fog that no one else could see. People around me carried on with their lives as if nothing had happened, but I was stuck replaying every detail. The fluorescent lights of that boutique haunted me. The sound of the guard's voice, flat, certain, echoed in my ears. The sting of being dismissed without apology clung to my skin like a stain I couldn't wash away. Yet, beneath the heaviness, something stubborn began to grow. A spark, a whisper, a refusal to let this moment silence me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one morning, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, staring at my script for an upcoming audition. It was for a role that was, let's just say, uninspired. Another background character, another flat stereotype dressed up as representation. I almost tossed the pages aside, thinking, why should I keep fighting to be part of a system that already sees me as less? But then, something shifted. That experience in the boutique, as painful as it was, became fuel. It reminded me why I wanted to act in the first place. Acting, for me, was never about fame or red carpets. It was about stories, about stepping into roles that gave people a chance to feel, to understand, to see life through someone else's eyes. And I realized that maybe I couldn't change what had happened to me in that store, but I could change how I carried it forward. So I walked into that audition room with a fire I hadn't felt in a long time. I read the lines they gave me, but I infused them with something raw, something real. When the character felt pain, I gave her my pain. When she resisted, I gave her my resistance. I left that room knowing they might not choose me, but I had chosen myself. I had chosen not to shrink, not to let the humiliation bury my voice. A week later, I didn't get the part, but the casting director pulled me aside, her eyes soft, almost apologetic. You've got something, she said. Something real. Don't let this industry change you. Her words lingered, not because they erased the pain, but because they reminded me that sometimes, even in a room full of doubt, one person can see your truth. It wasn't just auditions that began to feel different. Conversations with friends took on new meaning, too. I started opening up about what happened, telling the story I had once wanted to bury. And to my surprise, people leaned in. They weren't dismissive. They didn't say, oh, maybe it was just a misunderstanding. They listened. And then, slowly, they began sharing their own stories. One friend, a fellow actress, told me about the time she was stopped by police walking home from rehearsal. Questioned, searched, humiliated, for nothing more than fitting a description. Another told me about losing out on a role because the producers already had a black character. and didn't see the need for another. Every story was different, but the thread was the same. Suspicion. Assumptions. The invisible weight we were all forced to carry. Hearing them made me realize I wasn't alone, and in a way that was both heartbreaking and empowering. Heartbreaking because the problem was bigger than me. Empowering because it meant I wasn't fighting this battle in isolation. We were all carrying pieces of the same struggle. And then there were the strangers, people who had no idea what had happened to me, but who somehow crossed my path at the right moment. I remember an older woman I met on a set one day, a costume designer who'd been in the industry for decades. She watched me quietly as I rehearsed, then pulled me aside during a break. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," she said. "Bright, determined, but tired. Don't let them dim you. Your presence alone is proof that you belong." Her words hit me like a wave. Proof that I belong. It was such a simple sentence, yet it felt revolutionary. Because belonging isn't something anyone should have to prove. It should be a given. But in a world that constantly tried to strip it from me, hearing someone affirm it out loud gave me strength I didn't know I still had. I started journaling every night, pouring out my thoughts, my anger, my hope. And what I found was that the more I wrote, the more clarity I gained. The boutique wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a mirror reflecting the larger story of my life, of so many lives. And if I wanted to heal, I couldn't just push it aside. I had to face it, to name it, to transform it. And so, slowly, that humiliation became something else. Not something I was grateful for, because let's be honest, no one should ever be grateful for being treated like a criminal for simply existing. But it became a turning point, a marker, a reminder that silence and acceptance were no longer options for me. From that day forward, I vowed to speak louder, to stand taller, to carry my truth into every room I entered. Whether it was an audition, an interview, or even just a dinner with friends, I wasn't going to hide the reality of what I'd been through. Because hiding it only gave more power to those who wanted me small. And the more I shared, the more I realized that stories are weapons. Not weapons to harm, but weapons to dismantle, to break chains, to open eyes. That boutique tried to strip me of my dignity. But what they didn't realize is that they also lit a fire I can't put out. The first time I spoke about what happened publicly, my hands shook so badly I had to lace my fingers together to keep them still. It wasn't a press conference or some grand interview on national television. It was small, almost intimate. A podcast run by a friend who invited me to share my journey as an actress. I thought we'd talk about auditions, roles, the grind of the industry. But then she asked a simple question. "What's been the hardest part of your career so far?" The silence that followed was long, heavy. I could have answered with something safe, the rejections, the typecasting, the long hours. But for the first time, I felt that silence begging me to tell the truth. And so I did. I told her about the boutique, about the whispers, the guards, the humiliation of having my bag searched for nothing. I told her about the weight of suspicion that follows me like a shadow, even when I'm just living my life. I didn't sugarcoat it, and I didn't smile through it. I let the pain sit there in my voice, raw and unpolished. When the episode aired, I expected a few people to listen, maybe offer words of sympathy, then move on. But something unexpected happened. My inbox flooded with messages. Some were from strangers who had lived through the same thing. People who had been followed in stores, stopped by police, treated as less than human for no reason other than their skin. They thanked me for saying out loud what they had buried for years. Others were from people who admitted they had never thought about what it felt like. But now, hearing my voice tremble as I recounted it, they couldn't ignore it anymore. That was the first time I realized the power of taking something that was meant to shame you and turning it into testimony. Soon after, I started getting asked about it in interviews. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be defined only by my pain, didn't want to become a sob story the media could exploit for a headline. But then I remembered something my mother once told me. When you tell your truth, you're not just freeing yourself. You're giving someone else permission to do the same. So I kept telling it. On talk shows, I'd weave it into conversations. In panel discussions about diversity in Hollywood, I'd bring it up. Not to center myself, but to show that this wasn't just theory, it was lived reality. And slowly, something started shifting. People leaned in. Audiences clapped, not for the glamour of my career, but for the courage of my truth. Writers began asking if I'd contribute essays to magazines. Directors started seeing me not just as an actress, but as a storyteller with something urgent to say. At the same time, I took to social media. I remember typing out the words late one night, my heart racing as I hovered over the post button. I wrote, I was treated like a criminal for nothing but the color of my skin. That humiliation cut deep, but I refused to stay silent about it. This isn't just my story. It's a story too many of us carry. The post went viral. Comments poured in, some supportive, some cruel. People I'd never met shared their own experiences in the replies. Others accused me of exaggerating, of playing the victim. I read it all, every word, and instead of breaking me, it hardened my resolve. Because here's the thing about speaking up. Not everyone will believe you. Not everyone will care. But those who do, they're the ones you're speaking for. And their voices began to rise alongside mine. Before long, I was being invited to join panels not just about film, but about social justice. I found myself sitting beside activists, authors, professors, people who had been fighting this fight long before I knew how to name it. I listened, I learned, and I added my story to the chorus of theirs. And then something even more unexpected happened. I began to see changes in my work. Roles that once felt shallow began to take on new depth. When I played a character struggling with injustice, I didn't have to imagine the weight of it. I carried it in my bones. When I stood in front of the camera, I wasn't just performing. I was testifying. One director pulled me aside after a shoot and said, "You bring something to the screen that can't be taught. It's lived. It's felt." I knew exactly what he meant. What was once my humiliation had become my fuel, my fire. The boutique tried to strip me of my dignity, but instead, it gave me a weapon, my voice. And the more I used it, the more I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, doubted, dismissed, or dehumanized. My story was just one thread in a tapestry woven with countless others, and together, those threads were strong enough to resist being torn apart. That's when I stopped asking myself if I should keep speaking. The question became, how could I not? Speaking up, of course, came with its own set of challenges. Once my story began circulating, I quickly realized that sharing the truth meant opening myself up to scrutiny, judgment, and even outright hostility. Social media, for instance, became both a sanctuary and a battlefield. People who had never met me felt entitled to dissect my every word, offering their opinions as if my lived experience could be questioned, as if my pain was up for debate. First, it stung. Reading comments that doubted my innocence, accused me of exaggeration, or minimized my experience made me feel small. I had spent years building a career, honing my craft, navigating the harsh realities of an industry that already demanded perfection. And now here were strangers telling me my truth wasn't real. My first instinct was to retreat, to stay silent, to hide behind the privacy of my apartment, my scripts, my work. But then I remembered something my grandmother once said. You have to hold your ground, child. There will always be people who try to erase you, but you are not a shadow. They cannot dim your light unless you let them. And so I didn't back down. Instead, I chose to engage selectively. I responded not with anger but with honesty, with patience, and with clarity. When someone claimed I was being dramatic, I shared more context, explaining the psychological weight of living under constant suspicion, the daily microaggressions, the subtle ways society judges you before you even speak. I spoke about history, systemic inequality, and patterns that had persisted for generations. I reminded them that this wasn't just my story. It was a story echoed in countless lives, lives that often went unnoticed. With each response, each explanation, I felt myself grow stronger. Every doubter I engaged with forced me to clarify my truth, to refine my narrative, to confront my own fears and insecurities. What initially felt like attacks became opportunities to educate, to transform misunderstanding into awareness. And the more I spoke, the more I saw the ripple effect. People started sharing their own experiences, reaching out to say, I felt the same way. Thank you for voicing what I could not. That's when I realized something crucial. My story wasn't just about me anymore. It had become part of a larger conversation, a collective truth, a shared human experience. At the same time, my professional life began to reflect this inner transformation. I started choosing roles differently, seeking projects that explored social issues, that challenged stereotypes, that told real human stories. I declined parts that felt exploitative, roles that reduced characters like me to one-dimensional tropes. Instead, I gravitated toward projects that demanded authenticity, that allowed me to channel my lived experiences into performance. One project in particular stands out. I was cast in a film where my character was falsely accused of theft simply because of her race. Reading the script for the first time, I felt a wave of déjà vu. Every scene mirrored memories I had tried to lock away. But rather than feeling fear or anger, I felt purpose. I poured everything into that performance. The trembling of my hands, the hollow ache in my chest, the frustration and disbelief. For the first time, my pain became art, my trauma became a vehicle for empathy. When the film premiered, audiences approached me afterward, many in tears. They shared stories of being treated unjustly, of feeling unseen or stereotyped. Some said they had never considered the impact of microaggressions until seeing them played out on screen with such honesty. Others confessed that they recognized themselves or loved ones in my portrayal. It was overwhelming, humbling, and affirming all at once. I began to understand that facing attacks, criticism, and doubt was not just part of the cost of speaking out. It was also part of the reward. Every challenge forced me to confront my own resilience, to articulate my truth with clarity, and to lean on the courage I had been cultivating since that fateful day in the boutique. I also realized the importance of community. I connected with other actors, writers, and creators who had faced similar experiences. We formed an informal network of support, sharing advice, resources, and encouragement. Sometimes, just knowing someone else understood the invisible weight I carried was enough to keep me moving forward. We began collaborating, amplifying each other's voices, creating projects that challenged assumptions and sparked dialogue. And slowly, I noticed the change. Not just in myself, but in the people around me. Colleagues began questioning their own biases. Directors started casting with greater awareness. Audiences became more receptive to stories they might have ignored before. It wasn't a perfect or immediate transformation, but it was progress. It was proof that persistence, honesty, and courage could reshape perceptions, even if just a little at a time. Through all of this, one truth became crystal clear. Being treated unjustly, being doubted, being labeled incorrectly. It's a wound that never truly disappears. But that wound can become a source of power. It can become a lens through which we see the world more clearly, a compass guiding us to act with integrity, empathy, and purpose. I am no longer the frightened woman who walked into that store, hands trembling, chest tight with humiliation. I am a storyteller, a voice, a witness. And every word I speak, every story I share, every character I bring to life is a refusal to let injustice go unspoken. Because the world may try to define us by what we appear to be, but we have the power to define ourselves, and to make sure others see us in all our truth. After months of sharing my story, performing roles that mirrored my reality, and connecting with others who had endured similar injustices, I began to notice a shift, not only in how the world saw me, but in how I saw myself. There was a weight I had been carrying for as long as I could remember, a tension between the woman I wanted to be and the woman society assumed I already was. And slowly that weight began to change shape. It wasn't gone. It never truly disappears. But it became a lens, a filter, a tool. I began to recognize patterns of bias in ways I hadn't before, not just in others, but sometimes in myself. I had internalized parts of the world's assumptions, moments where I questioned my own worth, my own intentions, my own abilities. Confronting that truth was humbling and painful, but it was necessary. I remember sitting on my balcony one evening, the city lights stretching endlessly below me, and reflecting on my journey. From the boutique incident to the auditions, the interviews, the viral post, the film role, It had all been leading to this moment of clarity. I asked myself, who am I beyond what people assume? And the answer came slowly, not as a flash of insight but as a quiet, steady understanding. I am more than assumptions. I am more than doubt. I am more than the prejudice projected onto my skin. Race, I realized, is not just a label. It is a lived experience, a lens through which society filters you, often unfairly. And yet, it is also a source of identity, strength, and perspective. My skin has been both a target and a badge, a reason to doubt me, but also a reason to rise, to resist, to tell stories others cannot. The contrast is painful, but it is also powerful. I began to explore this more deeply in my personal life as well. Conversations with friends and family shifted. I no longer accepted dismissive explanations when injustice occurred. I no longer smiled politely when microaggressions slipped into casual remarks. I asked questions, challenged assumptions, and pushed for accountability. That doesn't make life easy. It makes it more honest, more real, more necessary. One afternoon, I visited a school to speak with students about storytelling and representation. A young girl approached me after the talk, her eyes wide and searching. "I didn't know people like me could be actresses," she said softly. Her words stayed with me. In that moment, I realized that the impact of my story, my choices, went far beyond my own career. It shaped how the next generation saw themselves, how they imagined what was possible. I also began to engage more actively in social causes, not as a celebrity lending a name to a movement, but as a person using her experiences to illuminate injustice. I collaborated with organizations that fight for racial equality, creating campaigns that highlight microaggressions, systemic discrimination, and the subtle ways bias manifests in everyday life. I shared my own story not to center myself, but to provide a human face, a tangible connection to the abstract struggles so many face silently. Through this work, I discovered another truth. Empowerment is not simply about rising above. It's about lifting others as you climb, creating spaces where voices that have been silenced can speak, and making sure that representation is not just visible, but impactful. It's about turning individual trauma into collective awareness, and collective awareness into action. And yet, even as I embrace this mission, I am not untouched by fear or doubt. There are days when the old insecurities return, the fleeting sense of not belonging, the question of whether people truly understand, or if I am being judged even in spaces where I should feel safe. But I have learned to sit with these feelings, to acknowledge them without letting them define me. Fear becomes a compass, not a cage. Doubt becomes a motivator, not a verdict. In the quiet moments, I reflect on the journey from that boutique, trembling under suspicion, to this present, where my voice carries weight, where my stories reach others, where my choices can inspire. It is not a journey of vengeance or bitterness, but of clarity, purpose, and resilience. Every injustice I endured, every moment I was doubted, every glance that reduced me to a stereotype has been transformed into something I can wield with intention. And I understand now that this is not just about me. It is about every person who has been misjudged, every person whose humanity has been questioned, every person whose story has been dismissed. It is about proving, not to the world, but to ourselves, that our existence is valid, our experiences are real, and our voices matter. In this way, my identity, my race, my career, my experiences, has become inseparable from my purpose. I am an actress, yes, but I am also a witness. I am not just telling fictional stories. I am telling the story of what it feels like to navigate a world that sees you before it knows you, that judges before it understands. And in telling these stories, I am reclaiming not only my dignity, but the dignity of everyone who has faced the same silence, the same doubt, the same prejudice. The ripple effect of speaking out became impossible to ignore. At first, it was subtle. Small gestures from colleagues, brief mentions in interviews, nods of acknowledgement in rooms where I had previously felt invisible. But as my story continued to circulate, I began to see the impact on a larger scale, in ways I had never anticipated. In the industry, conversations shifted. Casting directors and producers started asking more questions about representation and authenticity, about whether roles were being filled with understanding or mere tokenism. Panels and workshops began addressing microaggressions, bias, and the urgent need for Black actors to claim space for their own stories. That humiliating day in the boutique, once a private nightmare, had evolved into a case study of systemic prejudice. Raw, undeniable, and painfully real. People reached out from across the country and even internationally, sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Many had never spoken about these moments before, fearing disbelief or dismissal. Others admitted they hadn't noticed the subtle ways bias shaped daily life until hearing my story. Each message reinforced a sobering truth. These incidents weren't isolated. They were part of a broader, persistent pattern demanding recognition, understanding, and action. Social media, once a source of anxiety, became a platform for dialogue and education. Live sessions allowed followers to share experiences, ask questions about bias and privilege, and process emotions collectively. Some sessions were raw with tears and confessions. Others brimmed with anger at the slow pace of change. But all mattered. I realized that one voice, paired with honesty and courage, could spark reflection, challenge assumptions, and inspire action. My personal life shifted in tandem. Mentorship became a calling, guiding younger actors through spaces I had once struggled to navigate. I emphasized authenticity, resilience, and refusing to shrink in the face of prejudice. My story became proof that survival and resistance were not only possible, they could be transformative. Even small shifts in daily interactions felt significant. Colleagues listened more attentively, strangers paused before assumptions, and tiny gestures, thoughtful nods, respectful acknowledgement, signaled that awareness, combined with action, could affect real change. At a charity event for young Black creatives, a teenager told me, "I want to be like you. I want to tell my story too." At that moment, I realized my journey had become a bridge for the next generation, empowering them to claim their voices and insist on their humanity. Despite progress, I knew the work ahead was long. Change is never linear. Prejudice does not vanish overnight. Deeply embedded systems of injustice persist in institutions, culture, and history. Yet seeing dialogue replace ignorance, empathy replace assumption, and empowerment emerge from silence reaffirmed that resistance, even incremental, was essential. I began to understand that my story was part of a continuum, connecting me to everyone who had ever been misjudged, doubted, or silenced. The boutique incident, painful as it was, catalyzed broader social awareness, proving that injustice is often invisible to those who do not experience it, and that acknowledgement and confrontation are critical first steps toward meaningful change. My professional choices, roles, interviews, social media posts became acts of resistance. Each had the potential to educate, challenge perceptions, and dismantle subtle mechanisms of bias. Every "I see you, I hear you, thank you for sharing" message reminded me that this work was bigger than any single moment of humiliation or fear. I realized that transformation begins with visibility and honesty. By refusing to shrink, by speaking truthfully, I was creating space for others to do the same. Resilience became active engagement, a commitment to using my voice, my story, and my presence to illuminate the world. My story's power extended from the personal to the systemic. Speaking out was not enough. I had to influence structures where bias had long gone unchallenged. Hollywood, glamorous yet reflective of societal norms, mirrored the biases in casting rooms, scripts, and studio meetings, biases normalized with consequences beyond the screen. I joined initiatives promoting authentic representation, meeting with producers and executives. Some were unaware of bias shaping decisions. Others resisted acknowledging it. By sharing my experiences and concrete examples, I pushed for change. Scripts underwent inclusion reviews to ensure characters of color were fully realized. Casting directors attended workshops on implicit bias. Witnessing decision-makers confront decades of assumptions was small but revolutionary. Beyond the industry, I partnered with nonprofits focused on media literacy and racial equity. I visited schools and community centers, teaching students to recognize bias in stories and roles. Sharing my struggles and successes inspired young creatives to see that influence extends beyond Hollywood. It's about empowering the next generation to challenge systemic inequities. Social media became a deliberate advocacy tool. Posts, videos, and live sessions highlighted marginalized creatives, equitable hiring practices, and bias in society. Each interaction became a lesson, a connection, a ripple in a larger network striving for change. Mentorship remained central. I guided emerging actors and writers from underrepresented backgrounds, offering guidance, encouragement, and affirmation that resilience and authenticity could coexist with ambition. Small victories, scripts pitched, roles embraced, fears confronted, showed that progress often manifests in intimate, personal ways rather than headlines. In my work, I chose projects that challenged societal assumptions, portraying complex, authentic characters. Roles facing discrimination became opportunities to channel lived experience into performances that resonated beyond the screen, inspiring empathy and understanding of pervasive bias. Challenges persisted. Some colleagues dismissed advocacy as political. Projects faltered. Some resisted confronting assumptions. Yet momentum grew. Each policy shift, mentorship, and authentic portrayal reinforced the idea that intentional action, visibility, and courage could reshape narratives. Not just for me, but for countless others. I understood that impact is not measured in fame or awards, but in creating conditions where stories like mine are no longer exceptions, where misjudgments based on skin color decrease, and where future generations can move forward with dignity and opportunity. The boutique incident, once a moment of fear and humiliation, became a catalyst for systemic change. My story, voice, and choices influenced not only my career but industry standards, inspired young creatives, and contributed to a broader cultural reckoning. Pain had not broken me. It had prepared me to lead, influence, and transform. Amid public attention and social initiatives, a quieter, personal journey unfolded within me. Fighting for justice, mentoring others, and confronting systemic bias required processing the emotional and spiritual weight of being judged for something immutable. My skin color. Years of carrying undeserved shame prompted reflection. Why me? Why do they see threat or judgment in my mere existence? Instead of eroding me, this question invited deeper insight. Meditation, journaling, and reflection revealed that humiliation, doubt, and microaggressions shaped, but did not define me. Through internal work, I discovered that resilience is more than surviving. It's using experience to educate and inspire. Each role I played embodied lived reality. Each story amplified silenced voices. Purpose emerged not as something given but discovered through hardship, reflection, and action. I realized my struggles, advocacy, and mentorship were interconnected threads weaving a tapestry of purpose. Pain became action, fear became empowerment, and injustice became a chance to inspire others. Life became a story of resilience and courage, each encounter an opportunity to turn suffering into meaning. I realized legacy isn't measured in accolades but in the quiet influence left on lives and culture. Small actions, a young actor encouraged, a student inspired, created ripples of change. What once isolated me became bridges connecting generations, fostering activism, and contributing to lasting social transformation. With this awareness came a profound sense of responsibility, not a burden, but an opportunity. Every choice, statement, and role became part of a larger tapestry. I was no longer merely surviving in an industry or society prone to judgment. I was actively shaping its trajectory, planting seeds for a future where fewer would endure the prejudice I had faced. I thought of the young creatives who would follow. I imagined them navigating auditions with confidence, telling stories with honesty, and challenging stereotypes fearlessly. By sharing my story intentionally, I could empower them to step into spaces that once seemed closed, giving them a sense of belonging and the affirmation that they are not defined by bias. Legacy is also courage, the courage to stand when it is easier to sit, to speak when silence is safer, and to act when waiting feels easier. Years of personal struggle, advocacy, and reflection cultivated that courage, which became my gift to the next generation. It proved that even in a world quick to judge and dismiss, transformation is possible. Looking back, The boutique incident, a symbol of humiliation and fear, now represents growth, resilience, and advocacy. What once seemed devastating became the foundation for a life dedicated to truth, justice, and empowerment. In this transformation, I found purpose and a vision for a future where young people can enter the world with confidence, authenticity, and the knowledge that their stories matter. I realized legacy is never fully realized in one lifetime. It is a continuous thread woven through actions, words, and choices, passed from generation to generation. Embracing this brought fulfillment. My story was no longer solely my own. It belonged to those silenced, judged unfairly, or marginalized, and to those who would carry the torch forward, creating a more just and inclusive world. The impact of sharing my story extended beyond Hollywood or classrooms, reaching homes and communities nationwide. Messages arrived from people whose lives shifted after seeing themselves reflected in my experiences. One woman wrote, "Watching your interviews made me realize my own voice matters. I finally spoke up at work, and things started to change." Another young man pursuing acting said, "Seeing you face discrimination and still thrive gave me the courage to audition for a role I never would have tried." These stories proved that representation validates, affirms, and empowers. I noticed cultural changes too. Scripts began including authentic voices, characters of color gained depth and nuance, and discussions of bias and equity became standard in writers' rooms. Seeing young actors occupy roles that reflected their identities felt like quiet triumphs, proof that persistent advocacy reshapes industries and that visibility fosters accountability. Beyond entertainment, communities and social organizations also shifted. Schools implemented bias workshops, mentorship programs expanded, and grassroots initiatives used storytelling to educate and inspire. Teens, inspired by my journey, organized panels addressing discrimination locally. They weren't waiting for change. They were becoming it. I learned the most profound impact arises when one story sparks many others. Every person reached carried forward their own experiences, creating chains of awareness, resilience, and action. A young actress landed a role she'd feared was too ambitious and dedicated her performance to silence girls. A student wrote an essay on confronting bias, inspired by our conversation on authenticity and courage. These tangible outcomes made the abstract idea of impact real and moving. Hope proved contagious. It was not just a feeling but a series of actions, reflections, and choices. Witnessing others overcome obstacles, speak out, and turn adversity into purpose inspired more to act. My story became a living example of possibility, resilience, and transformation. I remained aware that the work is never complete. Every cultural shift requires nurturing, every voice amplification, and every injustice confrontation. Yet I no longer felt isolated. I was part of a network, a community committed to change. That knowledge brought comfort and renewed determination. Even when personal doubts emerged, the fear of misjudgment or misunderstanding, I reminded myself of the ripple effect. For every challenge I faced, someone gained strength. For every story shared, another found their voice. For every action, a new possibility arose. This understanding transformed the weight of my experiences from burden into power, from pain into legacy, from isolation into connection. Through storytelling, mentoring, and advocacy, I discovered its deeper purpose. Stories are tools for empathy, mirrors of society, and vehicles for change. Shared authentically, they illuminate truths, confront bias, and inspire action. My story, once personal struggle, had become a beacon, a source of hope, and a call to action for anyone silenced or marginalized. Reflecting on the journey, from the humiliating boutique incident to advocacy, mentorship, and cultural impact, I see a path defined not by what I endured, but by how I responded. Fear, anger, and doubt could have consumed me. Instead, I chose resilience, voice, and purpose. Adversity is a teacher. It reveals strength, shapes perspective, and ignites change beyond oneself. Being misjudged does not diminish worth. It reveals power and potential. Sharing my story, mentoring others, influencing industry practices, and witnessing ripple effects created profound meaning. Every challenge, injustice, and moment of doubt became part of a larger narrative of growth, impact, and empowerment. Legacy is not about me. It is about those touched by my journey, seeing themselves validated and inspired. It is about creating a world where fewer are judged by skin color, where silenced voices speak freely, and where authentic stories spark meaningful change. I discovered that true resilience is not merely surviving injustice, it is transforming it. Pain becomes education, inspiration, and empowerment. Even in a world quick to judge, there is room for dignity, purpose, and hope. As I continue sharing my story, mentoring, and advocating for systemic change, I carry the certainty that every act of courage, honest narrative, and effort to uplift others contributes to a legacy far greater than any individual. The world may judge, assume, or misunderstand, but together, we can redefine it, shining light where there was darkness, turning struggle into purpose, and injustice into legacy.